Live. Now it's live. All right. Tom here from Lawrence Systems and
Jay here from Learn Linux TV.
yes, we are here with Homelab show. Good news. A little housekeeping will take out of the way. We did register a domain, but through a calamity of errors, we own the domain, the homelab.show. It doesn't show anything right now. So I was hoping my lofty goals were to have the podcast ready. But yes, we are converting this to a podcast. Yes, all these episodes starting with 0 till current ones until it's live will be published and available as a podcast download. It may take me another week to get, less than a week, but it just didn't get done today because of a hosting issue that came up. But nonetheless, we did buy the domain, so the progress has been made. And yes, this will be a podcast. So we'll get that out of the way. There's our housekeeping for the day. But
yep, it's happening. That's the important thing.
It's happening, yes. We've been listening to the feedback. We'll continue to listen to the feedback. But right now we got a show to do, and it's talking about where to store all this. Because, I mean, even these recordings have to go somewhere. So this is the often debated, which one do I buy or build or file systems and everything. So let's talk storage.
Yeah, it's the one thing that unifies almost every home lab, if every home lab, depending on context, because you have to store something somewhere. And how many home labs have started because I want to run Plex? Where do I put all my movies? I mean, that's not every situation. Obviously, some people are running virtualization solutions and whatnot, and they want, shared storage. But, we have to put our stuff somewhere, even if it's just family photos or something.
Yeah, and the debates that go on, I will admit, and I'm okay, I will accept this from the very beginning. I'm a big fan of ZFS, and it's okay if you say, Tom, you could be in a cult. There's a chance. I mean, I am in the cult of ZFS. This comment seems to be randomly scattered around it because I've talked about ZFS too much on my channel. Also, Wendell from Level 1 Tech's definitely in the same cult as me. He's a huge fan of ZFS as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it a cult, because I think it's hard to tell the difference between someone that has chosen a solution that fits their use case specifically. And if something works really well for you, you're probably going to speak very highly of it because it's human nature. So it's hard to tell the difference between someone who's legitimately into it and enjoys it and it works for them, or a cult, right? Because in both situations, you are very excited about it. So I think it's fine. Personally, I'm a ZFS user as well. I don't think I'm, as high level as you are on that, but it's what I use. I use TrueNAS as well. But I think a lot of this is just kind of talking about what are the options that are out there.
Yeah.
I think the reason why there's a debate is because one, in my opinion, is not astronomically better than the other. If you look at pros and cons, you'll find possibly that they're even in their differences. It's just a matter of what is important to you and your use case. And we could probably help you understand some of the differences between them in this episode.
Yeah. And, I figured the file system is kind of a way to talk about things from the beginning. We'll get to the NAS and some ideas around NAS secondary, but, the NAS does have to run a file system. So that's a good place to start. Now, the cool thing about ZFS, and I'll say my piece on this, is ZFS isn't just a file system. It is the integration of the file system along with the block level devices themselves, the hard drives where the data is stored. That makes ZFS a little bit different than some of the systems like the MD80M RAID systems. Did I say that right? MD80M. All right. RAID systems that are in Linux, because they're managing the hard drive, but then you can format it to different file systems on top of the layer. So you have two different components managing it. And this can be a little bit confusing because they're like, well, ZFS just kind of does it all versus not doing it all. But there's some advantages when you go up at scale. And we've had people that set up servers that are, one of the ones, the reviews I'm working on right now is a 420 terabyte storage server. And it gets even bigger from there for some of the clients that we've done even larger servers for. You become really interested in how all that data sits because you got worries like bit rot, you got worries like a lot of other functions. And so from a high scalability, ZFS seems to be a good solution. Now swing it back the other way. in Synology, so we're talking about, me and Jay are both familiar with them, and they use a kind of an interesting mix because you use the MD80M RAID system along with ButterFS and ext4. They blend all of that together because
Right.
ButterFS is a competing file system for those BTRFS. Often, I've always heard it just called ButterFS.
Mhm.
But ButterFS is a system that's made to try to compete with ZFS, like an alternative option that also supposedly will do not just file system, but integrate the drives. But this is where
Right.
the split comes in for stability. There's some stability issues using ButterFS to manage the drives. This is where Synology made a hybrid design of using MD80M, your Linux RAID, versus the using ButterFS to it. They still get the advantages, the snapshots, and the journaling functions that you get with ZFS or ButterFS when you use ButterFS that has those options, but does not. They do not use it to handle the drives.
So I think we should probably talk a little bit more about that and break some of it down. Obviously, we've got to try not to take up the whole episode just
Yeah,
talking about file systems, but I almost feel like ZFS should be considered something else than a file system. Yes, it contains a file system, but it's so much more than that. Now, when I first started, I mean, we're talking, Windows NT4 and, Red Hat Desktop before Red Hat Enterprise, ext2 file systems. Back then, if you were to ask me what a file system is, I would say, well, it was in my lingo back then. I would say, well, it's just a table on a hard drive where it's indexing where things are. I would have gave you like a simplistic answer that's not completely true. But that was my mindset. It's just the way data is written to the disk, which is actually what it is. But when you talk about ZFS, you have tooling on there and intelligence that's built in. And you talked about disk scrubbing, like integrity checking if a bit gets flipped. But a file system, and this is confusing because I could say the Linux file system when I'm talking about the directory structure, but
yeah,
file system as far as the disk is concerned, it seems like the whole idea of what a file system is changing a lot. They're much more intelligent now. And ZFS adds a bunch of features on it. And it was basically made famous by BSD and is still obviously there. There's some controversy I won't get into about it coming to Linux in the form of OpenZFS, which is largely shouldn't be a problem now. So ZFS is a contender. ButterFS, which I've heard some people call it BTreeFS.
I've
I
heard
don't know
that
what.
before, and I
Yeah,
was confused. And
yeah. It's
I've heard it called ButterFS from people who work at Ubuntu, so I assume they're right. It was at the
I think it
PenguinCon
is,
conference.
and I've heard people say ZFS. There's different.
Well, if
We have
you're
like three names for everything.
yeah, if
I
you're
get
over
the
in
idea.
Europe, it's
Yeah.
ZFS is ZFS because they say Z is Z, or in England. So
So understanding the context, we're talking about how the drives are formatted, and that is one of the important differentiators between the solutions because the underlying file system, as in the intelligence around the storage and the hard drive, is something to keep in mind. It could be as simple or as complex as you want. Maybe you could just have a simple ext4 disk on an Ubuntu server, and you just manually set up NFS. It's a file server. I mean, it's a NAS. It's not a commercial one. You built it yourself. It's perfectly valid. You can roll your own, and that's an option for some people. And some people love that because they get full control. Other people want something out of the box, something that they could just buy, plug in, just set up through the GUI, through the web console, and that's valid as well. Maybe they like Synology. In my opinion, it's better out of the box. And we were having discussions offline that it's really great for enterprise users. Through NAS, you get additional features in a different direction. There's pros and cons. I think we could probably walk through the different solutions and then what sets them apart. And that might be a good basis
yeah.
to
And
help
before
people
we get
understand
into
where
it,
to
I will
start.
mention because I seen someone mention it's in there, and this is still separate from because I think the Homelab people are more going to be in tune, and this is where we'll keep the conversation going with building something like a TrueNAS,
Right.
Unraid, or using Synology. Of note, you can buy enterprise level storage equipment that does have its own RAID controller.
Yep.
Those, I don't think we're going to spend any time talking about them. They exist. Dell makes a lot of them. They have the PERT controllers. They do have a use case. They're not bad. You don't get any of the fine-grained controls you're going to get with, and where I see more of the Homelab people having interest like you do with like a TrueNAS system. But they are valid. They're good. They're more what you buy is what you get. There's a lot less tweaking you do with one of those. To give you a concept of how they work, though, when you buy something that's like an enterprise RAID controller, you'll have 10 drives in there controlled by the Dell PERT controller. But as far as the operating system is concerned, it sees just one hard drive. That's less interesting and usually not where it's not where you get the most performance on there. And tuning those is, well, you're dealing with a proprietary controller that they had, and it's I don't know. I'm less than thrilled with those. What we are going to more focus on is the NAS solutions.
Right.
And if you're using an enterprise storage server, you need it to be in, whether you call it IT mode or pass-through mode. We're talking about the operating system interacting directly with every individual drive. And I know we mentioned ISI a little bit. We were talking about hardware last time, but yes, there's ways to reflash firmware. Someone said it's easy. Just follow some tutorials. It's better if you can buy them without it being flashed. So we'll leave it at that.
You can, yeah, and just for a bit of context, and I think we have mentioned this before, you can go on eBay and buy it in whichever mode you prefer. So if you want the operating system to see that there's a RAID controller or not, depending on how you want that set up. And then the term JBOD comes up a lot, just a bunch of disks, I believe it stands for.
Yep.
And that's important when you're considering TrueNAS, because you want TrueNAS to control the disk. You don't want something else to control it. ZFS wants to be in control of it. And that's one of the places where this comes in mind and where you have to pay attention, because if you do want ZFS, if TrueNAS is your decision, then you probably will need to pay attention to this if you're buying a server on eBay or something.
Yeah, it's something to look at. And the good news is, and like I mentioned last time, you type in the word FreeNAS or even like FreeNAS Supermicro in eBay, you'll find a bunch of them already configured in the mode to allow that. So you don't have to do as much tinkering. That's handy because there's enough tinkering you'll do trying to figure out, because the next question is, how do you set all the drives up, or what's the most optimal way? And boy, that's a tough question to answer. But let's
it really is, yeah. I mean, one way we could think about it is several scenarios. A, you have a desktop lying around. B, you want to buy something like a commercially supported device, or you want to buy a server that can help differentiate the scenarios a bit. And because you could just install TrueNAS on a device, buy something with TrueNAS built in, buy a Synology, QNAP, Robo, whatever you want. And that's really up to your use case.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a couple of NAS ones out there. Now, are you an Unraid user at all, as I'm not?
I am not. And I feel like there's some of these things I'm not going to be able to talk about as intelligently as others. And that is actually one I would not be able to speak so intelligently about.
I've dealt a little bit with it just, from client interactions. And so I'll mention, I have no problem with Unraid. If you really like Unraid, there's a couple of really good channels that have more in-depth tutorials on that. It's not hard to do a quick YouTube search for it. I think Unraid's really popular. It was made... Linus Tech Tips probably really threw it up there in the popular world because it's a great solution for a lot of use cases. The things I don't like about Unraid as much is it does not, to my knowledge, natively right now, there's add-ons I know, support ZFS, but the advantage you get is the fact that without using ZFS, it has more expandability to just add more drives to the unit. So I have no problem if you want to use it as a solution. I have no reason to tell you not to use it, so to speak. If it's the preference you have, if it scratches your itch, awesome. What me and Jay definitely know a lot more about is the two other ones we want to talk about, and that's going to be TrueNAS, which is formerly FreeNAS, but TrueNAS and Synology.
Yes, that's going to be a big component too. So, and also, I do want to add out there, like manually setting up your own Ubuntu server. I mean, we're not going to walk you through that in here, obviously, but that's an option too for a more manual approach. But I recently had a chance to check out Synology, and just for completeness, I am a TrueNAS user. I have been for a while. Before that, I was running a manual Linux server where I just hand coded all the NFS configs, IP tables, Samba, all of it by hand. And I moved from that to Synology, and then moved from Synology to TrueNAS. And by moving to TrueNAS from Synology, I'm not saying that Synology is inferior. There's a few quirks that we'll probably talk about today about Synology in the context of a Linux user, because I think that's also an important thing to keep in mind too. There's some quirks.
Yeah, Synology does make, and I get it depending on how deep you want to go. From an out-of-the-box configuration, Synology is relatively easy to use. They're plug-in nature. They're kind of I like their UI. It's very intuitive, I would say. It's very it's in a browser, but not like a typical browser menu click. Like it's got draggable
Right.
windows for those of you that haven't seen it or watched any of the reviews. Has your review been published yet, Jay?
It has not. It's been recorded. I'm a bit behind. I still think it might land this week. I have a video where I'm going over Open Media Vault, another option. In fact, this is it right here. This will be in the, I'm editing it right now in the queue. I'm going to talk about how to build your own Open Media Vault server with a Raspberry Pi and a M2 storage. That's this week. Synology this week as well. So I guess on my channel,
Yeah.
it's NAS week pretty much.
I have a few videos on it, but their interface leads it to be relatively easy. The other thing that's really, easy for users to get started with when it comes to Synology is going to be the fact that they offer easy expansion of I only have the money to buy 3 discs now. And constraints, monetary constraints are really a big part of home labbing because you're often not in the later parts of your tech career. You're in the I want to get started in tech. That means I don't have that money just to run out and buy 10, 16 terabyte drives and build it, right? Synology does do a nice job of letting you buy the basics and then grow into it. That's definitely an advantage. If that's like one of the check boxes that you're really looking for, I would definitely go say yes on Synology. Also,
Yeah.
they're kind of almost like a one-click install. Their application store is extensive. There's a lot of things built into Synology that are make it pretty easy to get going right out of the box. Like this, you run through a little application list, click this. Oh, I want to back up my PC, my Windows boxes for my family. Cool. They have a complete native backup computer system built right in that stores it right back to the Synology that even has a whole bare metal restore. There's a lot of that functionality that even for home users we've seen is awesome. And especially if you're playing with Homelabs, you want to be able to tear down machines and rebuild them quickly. Synology has that way on there. You want to back up the kids' PC because they're going to click on something, and you would love to be able to restore it right back. And it's not that you can't do that and use TrueNAS as a destination. It's just like I don't know. Have you used backup PC and some of the ones integrated in TrueNAS? They're not as intuitive.
I have not, but I did get a chance, and this is going to be in the review, so I'm giving it away. But the Docker integration is fantastic in Synology. Like, I think my complaint is that it's too easy. Like it is so good. Like you can download the image, you can run a container from that image, you can have it always running. There's a checkbox for it. And since Synology is a storage device, adding storage to the container is easy to do. So you could basically create a shared folder in Synology. You can mount it to the container so the container is able to write its configs to something, and then you could view the logs for each individual container in the same menu. And the reason why I say it's too easy is because if you are studying Docker, it's going to completely abstract how it works underneath the hood. But maybe that's okay because maybe you want to run containers and you don't really care how it works behind the scenes. But if you do care, you could explore that further on another machine. But their Docker support is really good. I was actually very surprised by that.
The way it
It's
just
really
pulls right from the Docker repository, I sing a lot of praises for Synology because it really, like Jay said, do you want to know how it works? Is this what your home lab goal is? Or is your home lab goal, I just want to run Plex and be in control of my media. I want it to not have that reliance on third-party services, but I'm also not a technical person who wants to know exactly how Docker maps storage or how Docker maps networking, because they do. They make an interface on top of it that, like Jay said, it's a few clicks and next thing you know, it's just working. You can run through a wizard, next and yes your way into having a Docker image. And I don't see that's necessarily bad. I think it puts technology in the hands of people at a faster rate. So the overall on that is still a pro on there.
I think it's true that Synology has, for a beginner home lab user, the most ability to potentially become your only thing. If there's someone out there that wants only one device, they want a device that, let's say they want to run Plex and they want to have storage for the movies. I don't know how well Plex runs on the Synology, so I can't personally speak to that, but you probably can do it. But speaking in terms of Docker, I was looking at the container I was running, and the unit had 4 gigs of memory, ECC memory, and the container was using 50 megabytes of RAM. Now, if I was to set up a virtual machine and try to run that same app, it's probably going to waste 512 megabytes to a gig. And that's where we get a little bit of trouble because it ships with 4 gigs of RAM.
Yeah.
And that'll go very far if you want to run nothing but containers, because like I mentioned, my container that I was running, 50 megabytes. But then if you're wanting to run a bunch of VMs, okay, now we're starting to get a little constrained here. So, but you could expand the memory in these units. I think the one I reviewed can go up to 32 gigs. Is 32 gigs enough? Well, I don't know. Are you running Java apps? So if you want to have a one machine that's everything, if you're running a bunch of containers, you want your storage, that's perfectly fine for you. But if you want like serious virtualization, you might need a separate server. But it is possible to run virtual machines on that unit. Just be mindful you can't run like 15 virtual machines at the same time on a Synology. But if you only need to run one or two, it might just be fine for you.
Yeah, and someone said Synology is a little pricey for the hardware you get. That's kind of a mixed bag because you're not really. I mean, if you tried to spec it out, what processor they use, which are usually the lower end, not really high powered ones. So yeah, if you're going to build something, we'll get to that in a second with the true NAS.
Yep.
You can for that dollars build something that's got a little more horsepower, a little more memory. But to the other side of that, it's Xpinology, I haven't used it before. I know people ask about that, which is the running it on yourself. It's not the same and doesn't, to my knowledge, have the full support or work as well as a native Synology does. You're paying not really for the hardware, you're paying for the way they fund the development of all that ease of use that they baked into the system. That's kind of what you're paying for. It's not as much the hardware, it's the hardware, and the profit goes into the lack of licenses required, I should say, in order to do it. Because it's not like they're going, hey, we do have Docker, but that's a $5 a month fee or anything like that. They're not trying to nickel and dime you. Not saying there's no fees, because you can also use it, for example, for a camera system. And we've actually deployed a lot for clients, Synology's surveillance station, which has perpetual licenses that you buy. So you do have to buy licenses for the cameras, but they're one-time purchase and they are transferable to another Synology. So they do have a couple things like that, like some of the advanced features of virtualization are licensed, but the basics aren't, and Docker's not. And all the backups features that it has, like Office 365 backups, email backup solutions. As a matter of fact, they have a whole mail server system in there. There's a couple things that they do also include in there that are kind of interesting.
I think it's everything but the kitchen sink is what's in Synology. But I actually, speaking of price, I compared it to the TrueNAS Mini, the base model. So the unit that I reviewed that's going to be on my channel, I think it retails at $799 for the Synology that I reviewed. And again, it has 4 gigs of memory. So the base model TrueNAS Mini has 8 gigs of RAM. So it's 4 more gigs of RAM than the Synology at the same price. However, you also lose 2 drive bays at the same time. So
Yeah.
weigh what's more important, memory or having those extra drive bays. And with TrueNAS, of course, you could build your own, or you could just buy a TrueNAS Mini if you'd like. There's a few options, but if you have something lying around like a spare server, a spare desktop, if it's up to the task, you could actually just install TrueNAS on that device.
Yeah. Now, the last comment I'll probably make on Synology is the wattage is probably kind of another one more to the Synology side. When you buy a complete device like that, you take the guesswork out of building. Now, some people are going, you're taking the fun out of building, because I like building things and tinkering with it. But there is another class of people that go, I'm here to learn software development. I don't have time to learn why random reboots are happening. So there is a little bit of advantage of buying a complete, this software works with this device, low wattage. Their fans are generally quiet with their desktop units. Specifically, they're really low noise. So you kind of get that. It's because someone even commented, like, their Synology idle is like using 20 or 30 watts. Like, yeah, that's normal. That's their.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, that's kind of the last thing I'll have to really compliment on Synology.
And it is true. And to be fair, you can achieve that similar thing with TrueNAS, but you do have to put a little bit more work into it. The one behind me, which is in my rack behind me, the blue one, is a TrueNAS server. It takes about 50 watts of power, somewhere between 50 and 60 watts of power for the whole thing. And I achieved that because I put a lot of research into the parts. It wasn't like I'm going to buy everything right now in 15 minutes. I took some time. I don't know if it was a week or two. And also I have the time because I'm going to make a video about it. So it's within my best interest to really make this work. But someone might want something turnkey. Synology is great for that. But you can achieve that with TrueNAS. But like you said, Tom, you have to really pay attention to what you're buying and compatibility in that to make that
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the fun part. Let's build a true NAS. And this can cross over to Unraid as well. The hardware that you choose for this, whether you want to build it on an old server or you want to build the hardware yourself, either way, there's definitely options there. But it comes down to picking the hardware. This is on the TrueNAS forums. I do like, they have a whole dedicated section of the forums called Will It. I think it was called Will It Free NAS. I think it's called Will It True NAS now. They've been changing names,
Yeah.
but it was kind of where you could ask the questions of what cards to use and things like that. And I'll give a big shout out to Serve the Home. They've been doing a pretty good job of keeping this up to date. They kind of keep a list of recommended popular hardware to build if you're going to buy parts. And of course, every year, I think it's Brian Moses who does this. He does this really nice blog post where he details out hardware choices for TrueNAS. It gets retweeted by TrueNAS. You type in like, actually he's almost always the top result because he's been doing it for so long. We can leave a link later in the descriptions, but either way, there's a lot of different guides out there for building your own. You can even, if you don't want to buy something from IX Systems, and they do sell like their TrueNAS minis, which are turnkey complete. So there are complete solutions. You don't have to build everything your own. And if you go to the enterprise level, IX Systems offers really high-end custom-made servers. And we're a reseller, so we've actually sold some of that equipment as well. But if you want, you can just look up the specs and the hardware used in like the TrueNAS Mini. And yes, it is loosely based on, well, not loosely, it's a very slightly modified like Supermicro system. So yeah, you can go ahead and go there, get that type of system and buy those same motherboards, buy those same parts. I think Supermicro makes a case that's almost, they OEM it for IX Systems or something like that because it's about the same case, but it doesn't have quite the same branding. But it's still a nice small case with a bunch of removable bays. Or you can go look at some of the different hot trays if you need the hot trays and you want to do absolutely custom build it yourself.
Yep. And normally what I would tell people is, since I have a TrueNAS server that I built, you can watch my video. You can look at the list of parts that I use to achieve this. But the reason why I'm not telling you to look at that and not telling you to look at the parts list is because I built that server like right before the pandemic started. And now the prices of those parts have skyrocketed. So now you can look at it. Now that I've given you the disclaimer, but it's like, it costs what? That motherboard costs what? I could buy a whole system for that price. But it's not what it cost when I did the video, which is really complicating things right now. Some of these parts, if you want to buy them new, is kind of hard to do, actually, for a reasonable price.
Yes,
Definitely.
some challenges there for sure.
But if you have something lying around, and I keep mentioning that because I think that's how a lot of Homelab people start, because they have this old computer, maybe their previous model or another thing they were using. Use it, try it, right? It's just collecting dust anyway. And sometimes that's how people start because they don't always have the money to go buy something new. If you have something, you could try it out. If you have extra hard drives, I mean, that could be something where Unraid would shine. If you have like, I have a 500 gigabyte drive here, I have a 1 terabyte here and a 2 terabyte here, or whatever you have. They're not all the same. They're all different. One's 5400 RPM, the other 7200. So even the speed is different. And I'm pretty sure, isn't it true that Unraid is what you would want to use in a situation where you have unlike drives?
Yeah, Unraid, because it has a different, it's not using ZFS, and we'll get to that in a second, exactly why you need to build ZFS the way you do. There are ways you can mix and match drives more so in Unraid. Just like Synology, Unraid also has that as kind of an advantage of being expandable, so to speak, because they're basing it differently. They're not doing ZFS. Once you come over to ZFS, and this is going to be the same for Unraid, if they decide that ZFS is the way, as I believe you can use ZFS as an add-on for Unraid. It's just not native right now. Like I said, I'm not an Unraid expert. But if they decide to go to ZFS, this will be a challenge that comes with it. Like Unraid will be able to say, oh yeah, you can mix and match and do different drives and expand the RAID. Oh wait, unless you build it based on ZFS. Now you wouldn't be able to. You're going to do that because the limitations are not TrueNAS. The limitation is the way and the nature of ZFS. There is a way to expand ZFS, but you have to expand it with symmetry. I did drop in the show notes. It is briancmoses.com. He's got a DIY NAS Econo 2020 and DIY NAS 2020 edition. He's been doing these for years. Like they go back for years and years with lots of details on hardware and everything else. So it's a great read. He breaks down all the little components and talks through a lot of why he built it the way he does.
And there's one aspect of ZFS I do want to cover. I don't know if this is the best place to insert it, but I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. Because, when you make the mention, like what's required to get into it, what do you have to start running ZFS? Then some people might think, wait a minute, if it's like I have to consider all these different things just to get started with it, then that's kind of annoying and tedious and kind of overwhelming for me to have to worry about all these different variables. Why would I do that? I could give you an answer that happened to me. I have a ton of pictures, probably 20 or 30,000 pictures at least. And I think I'm being a little on the low end on there. And one time, I don't know if the kids are asking me about an event or something. So I start clicking through some pictures. And in this one folder, I had like 30 pictures, and 2 of them were distorted, completely just horrible. You couldn't even look at them because they were just completely corrupted. Now, the thing is, when did those 2 pictures become corrupted? I don't look at my photos every day. I might look at them once a year, maybe once every 2 or 3. It could have been that these files were corrupted a long time ago. I didn't know. I went to go look at these pictures and I can't view a few of these. So what did I do? Well, I did what every new Homelabber does. I overcomplicated the heck out of it. A friend and I wrote a Perl script. And what this Perl script does is it does an MD5 on every single file on the file system, and it writes it to a matching text file. And if the MD5 is different the next time it runs, and let me tell you, it takes days for this to run, it'll send me an email, say, yeah, the MD5 is different on this file. Of course, that is the hardest way to do it, but we were proud of this Perl script. It was so cool. But then looking at ZFS, it has the ability to find this kind of thing and help with bit rot when things are sitting idle on your file system. And when you have pictures and memories, what do? You can't view every single photo every single day to make sure that it hasn't, had an issue. You need something that's going to help you check the integrity. So in that case, ZFS, however complicated it may or may not be, might actually be worth considering.
Yeah, and this is one of those use cases. So, even for me personally, my data collection days go back to the 90s. I still have bringing forward, if you can remember, a Sony Mavica camera with a floppy disk in it. Yes, I had one of those in 1990 something, late 90s. And yes, I still have all the photos I ever took and stored them. Now, back then I didn't store them on ZFS, but now I do. I've been carrying forward data for years. I don't really look at that data too often, but it's kind of cool the fact that I can. And once in a while, I'll feel maybe like going down memory lane and looking at old Sony Mavica pictures. But what happens is the bit rot, and we've dealt with this with our commercial clients, especially in the film industries. They produce very, very large files, lots of content, lots of assets, as they always refer to them. That asset block they create, and we actually have a client that produces high-end commercials like that you've seen on television or wherever commercials are displayed these days. They produce these, and sometimes they want to modify or respin a commercial, but not spend the time reshooting it. And there may be a year or 2 later before said company wants that asset reaccessed. This has been the case. What's gotten some of them to switch to things that are ZFS based because they're going, yeah, we bought this proprietary $50,000, $100,000 storage server. And yes, that's the kind of prices they're talking on these. And it was unable to retrieve a fully working, functioning asset. They had to reshoot things. Or like the cost of reshooting was expensive or sometimes not as possible, and they're supposed to be the stewards of this. Like the contract isn't just do this commercial and you're done. It's, hey, we're going to ask you after you shot all this footage to produce a series of commercials over time. So there's some real risk that comes in there from a scalability standpoint. And like Jay said, checking all those files, that is something ZFS does a good job with, its scrubbing to stop bit rot. So while the complexities of ZFX make it kind of unattractive for some people, the unattractiveness of losing long-term data is very much there. Now, you can expand ZFS. It's not hard as many people make it sound, but you can't willy-nilly randomly grab drives and expand it. I've got some videos I've done on this about expanding uneven VDEVs. So when you're building the pool is where all your data lives. And then the pool is built on VDEVs. VDEVs are groups of drives. And just trying to keep it as simple as possible. Someone's going to be pedantic and say, I'm not explaining it enough detail, but I'm trying to keep it simplistic here. And
Right.
as long as those VDEVs are kept symmetric. So if I have a VDEV of 5 drives and I have 5 extra bays, perfect. Later, I can expand and add 5 more drives. I can't add 4 and I can't add 6. I can add 5 more drives. And if the first VDEV was RAID Z1, the next one has to be RAID Z1, not RAID Z2. Or you have to rebuild all the data, move all the data somewhere else, regroup the drives, pair them back up, and bring it all back in if you want to do it differently. But they can be expanded. It's just a little bit trickier when you're doing it. So it takes a little bit more careful planning. And an example is going to be, we just quoted a company, another company storing a bunch of storage for movies they're creating, or specifically a sporting event. And the way that quote works is they know how many drives they need now, but they want to buy some of those drives later. So we bought a system and we're going to leave half of the bank empty so we can expand it later and expand it without having to do a full reset. So it's able to buy a chassis. Cost is a little bit higher because it has expandability, but these are the kind of planning that you need to do when you're building out ZFS. Just a little bit of forethought on there. Now, the fun part, as me and Jay will definitely attest to, is the tinkering you can do once you build your true NAS system. You have really great level command line access. You can build iSCSI that's going to be at high performance levels. You're going to be able to build NFS shares for your virtual machines. You're going to be able to use the ACL system tied to Active Directory if you want to go that crazy in your Homelab. Not every Homelab does Active Directory, but there's a reason they do, because maybe your job entails using Active Directory, so it's a good learning thing. Yes, you can incorporate it. The latest TrueNAS has lots of ACL options for granular control of permissions and mixing them all together. So you can have some iSCSI over here. You can have some Active Directory controlled permissions over here. And it's just kind of there's a lot you can do. It's very extensible.
Yep. And I think, yeah, the tweaking thing has been a lot of fun for me. I mean, the snapshotting capabilities and the data stores, like the data stores are great because you could separate logically your storage however you'd like. Like I have a media data store, and inside there, I have a videos data store for the movies, and I have a music data store for all my music. That's where all my Lacuna Coil albums go, for example. I mean, I can go on. And then I also have a sync thing data store. Inside there is a documents data store, and I have one for projects, one for downloads, and I can go on and on and on. I even have one for my RetroPies. I have data stores for those. And the way that they're logically separated is great. You can snapshot those and come up with your own snapshot schedule, weekly, daily, hourly, however. So you could go back to that point. And what's really cool is you don't have to overwrite the snapshot to the source. You could actually create a new data store off the snapshot, fetch the file that it was missing or that you accidentally deleted, put it where it needs to go, and then delete the copy. And anyone using it will not even notice that you were even doing maintenance on it.
Yeah, the snapshotting in ZFS is one of the really powerful things that make it just a wonderful system, because you got, sure, back it up. Everyone should be backing up. That's not in question at all, hopefully. Because RAID is not a backup. RAID is resilience. All right, we got that out of the way. But the snapshot system is really fluid, and it allows you to very simply go through and say, all right, this is the file system as it existed at this snapshot, and this can be automated in the system. And then you can always so quickly roll back to it. And because everything of the way ZFS works is copy on write, it's got a really nice way that it just instantly can spin that up. I mean, there's like no delay. You're not watching it spin for a long time. And like Jay said, you can fork a snapshot to be its own thing. So you're like, I need to see a slice of what the data looked like 3 weeks ago. And, so I can jump backwards 3 weeks, but leave my current data completely intact, get that piece I needed out of there, and then destroy that and not have to worry about it. Or like you said, you can even build it as another share somewhere else.
Yep. You get a lot of flexibility. One thing I want to mention, though, is I do understand that ButterFS has at least some of the features that we've been talking about.
Yes.
I know it has scrubbing, but I'm not as familiar with ButterFS yet. I am in the process of looking into it more, but I'm sure in the comments it's probably already happened and someone's mentioned that. So there is going to be feature carryover in ButterFS. I'm just not as familiar with it yet, but I am aware of that.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning. Someone said Synology does have data scrubbing as well. Yes, they do. That is a function that you can turn on a per share that you do in Synology. So it's not that they are devoid of all these functionalities, but at scale, I really do feel. Go back to that very first comment of Cult of ZFS. ZFS, I think, does it better. So
Right.
argue with me in the comments on that one.
So someone, I forgot who it was. I'm trying to scroll back and find the individual who made this comment, but they were saying that something like they've been a data hoarder for a while and have not encountered bit rot for years or if at all, and are wondering why we have. Well, the thing about that is you have it's like Schrodinger's cat, right? You don't know if you have encountered the problem unless you go looking for the problem. You're not going to go listen to every single MP3 or every single picture or look at every single photo that you have. And if you're able to look at every single photo and MP3, you're not a hoarder because you don't have that much. So when you get a lot of stuff, you may not know until, oh, yeah, that picture is corrupted, and when I open it, it's just a bunch of random colors in this one area. That doesn't look right. That's not how I remember this picture. And then it dawns on you, I had bit rot hit me. So you never really know unless you're like always looking at your things, and you just can't. There's just not enough time in the day or even a week to do
It
that.
it is a very challenging thing to see the bit rot and find it, and it sometimes takes years. It's that one file, and of the assets, they were only missing one video out of an entire library of them that were in there. So they had all this footage. With my client that was doing the commercials, they had a video that was missing. It turned out not to be the most critical, but it was really scary to them because they were like, "Why is this one broken?" But the other ones work around it. The one before it and the one after it works, but this one's broken. Good news is they're like, this is just a shot across the bow. They said like they didn't need that file critically, but what if? And the next question is because the project of putting a team together. Hey, can you guys view? We've got 9,000 videos. Can you take the time to view all of them? Tell me if any of them open. No one wants to put the labor into doing that. Or even the sports team that we just quoted one for, just from the last season because of the high-end cameras they shoot. They're like, we got 55 terabytes. That's where we're starting at, and our growth is, because we bought new cameras, is going to be about, we think, 50 to 80 terabytes per season. So we want it to last 5 years.
Yeah.
Plan for
what
that.
What would that look like, though? I mean, if you're watching a short video, something that's 30 seconds long, if you have distortion in that video for a second, you might notice it. But if you're looking at a movie, are you going to notice that distortion? What if there's a lot of action and it's like a highway chase scene or something? You may not notice, but if it's a really huge problem, like Tom said, it doesn't open. Yeah, of course, you got a big problem. But if there's just some little distortion in there in a video, it may not be as apparent. But if you're looking at a photo, which is a still, I think that's the most obvious one. And I had this one issue where, I'm a retro gaming collector, as a lot of people know, and I have like 800 games or something like that. And I like to have a digital copy of the game, so I have a ROM. I'm not going to make this an emulation discussion, but I, for years, was not able to run Super Mario All-Stars. And I'm like, well, this game has, I don't know, something is crazy with the ROM or something like that. I just wrote it off. And then one day I'm like, I'm going to re-download this game. Why not? Oh my God, it works. For years, I just assumed it was just hard to emulate that game. No, there's just something wrong with this copy of the game that I've had for 5 or 6 years. I just put it down to emulation is hard sometimes, but no, that's not what it was. It was bit rot. So,
but yeah, it's definitely a concern. It's not going to happen to everyone, but as you start accumulating massive amount of data, you are playing a statistics game. But now let's get back on topic of storage servers and NAS servers. Now, both Synology and Free NAS, True NAS, do support backups of things, including cloud backups. This is actually probably something to really consider. And I want to bring it up because that data center event that happened at OVH last week, which is still going on this week. Yeah, the big fire.
Yeah,
One of the things that I'm working on is some new videos on this. And one thing that's really cool is it's not just about backing up what you have. Sometimes the opposite is true of using these devices to pull all your data back because maybe part of your lab lives in the cloud, and you
right.
then rely on the cloud provider to back it up. This is something where you have a lot of flexibility with your TrueNAS systems, not just in the jails, but they actually have quite a few different cloud providers they support for both the ingress or egress of data. They even have ways to attach it to Google Drive, ways to attach it to OneDrive, to be able to, you know, put that on there. Oh, and someone did ask if your ROM was bit rot. That's kind of a question we don't know.
Yeah, we don't. You don't always know. It's almost like the classic, my motherboard doesn't work. Could it have been an electric, like a static shock? I don't know. I tried everything else and it just doesn't post. Maybe I accidentally static shocked it. I have no idea. Like, what is the root cause? But I mean, it was a picture example I gave. Yeah, for sure. I've seen that picture a handful of times. It was fine. All of a sudden, it's not. And the problem with that is you always have like cycling backups and snapshots. But if you don't know that you have this problem, then your snapshots are going to age out and you no longer have a snapshot from whatever time period that picture was not corrupted. And then it just ages out of your storage. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the problem.
hmm So the talk more about the FreeNAS TrueNAS. Now, the other flexibility I think that makes TrueNAS really popular is the fact that you don't have any license fees at all attached to it. I mentioned that with Synology. One thing about the way Synology does things is you're registering and downloading their DSM into their device, which does talk to their servers to activate and things like that. I keep
Right.
that in the back of my mind a lot because a change in a company's policies can change the way a device works. Not to throw shade at Unify, but hey, Unify. There's certainly been some controversy where they didn't require registration. They decided, you know what? We require registration now on that device that you bought that didn't require registration. They changed the terms of the deal. The nice thing about TrueNAS, you can just download the ISO. It does not reach out to some activation server. It's not chattering away, going, hold on, register with us to get a license key. There's none of that with TrueNAS. That's one of the reasons from a Homelab standpoint, it's much like a Linux distribution is. I download it, I run it. It didn't require me to go out and activate it. This is really one of the 4 core fundamental things that make a lot of people running home labs happy is trying to have a level of autonomy over the things they have. They give you that control, and this is like XCP-ng, like we talked about last time with hypervisor. Same thing. They're like, take it. Here's all the code. It's not reaching out. It's not phoning home and activating special accounts. It's here. Here is the XCP-ng stack, and the same thing. TrueNAS follows that very much the same. They're like, download and do what you want with it. Essentially, like, block it off from the internet. Doesn't need access to make it work. That really pushes it on the Homelab side to giving people that confidence that if there was a policy change in the future at some company, someone decides to change the way TrueNAS is produced and decided they should have a registration. 1, the project would probably get forked and become unpopular. But 2, the version at least you have now will not do that. It won't change the version you have. That just makes me feel a lot more comfortable. I think a lot about, and I know this is a popular topic among, if you drew a Venn diagram for people that are privacy oriented and home lab builders, there's a pretty good overlap of those people because we want autonomy over our data. We want to decide what's done with it. We want to decide how these tools should be used. And, I believe I have the right to keep those Mavica photos and not necessarily have to put them online, unless I want to.
And if you think about it, your decision on which NAS to use is not different than an enterprise decision on which NAS to use. Because if it's an enterprise, they're going to get everybody in a boardroom or a meeting room and say, okay, what's important? What do we want? What are the features that we're looking for? Who are the vendors or, that kind of thing. And then you as the home lab person, you may not have a whole team of people that are working with you on it. It's your decision. That's also one of the benefits of home lab because you don't need the CEO's blessing on anything, but you still have to consider like what's important to you as an individual. How private is your data? How bad would it be if it was gone? How bad would it be if it was accidentally exposed? And do you care that there's a company that's on top of that solution that some CPU cycles are sending information their way. Does that bother you? And you as the individual will make that decision because it is your decision to make. And that's why it's a debate, because there's no clear one way to go. There's all these different factors that you have to choose between. And it's just like an
Mhm.
enterprise, they do the same thing.
Now, let's get onto a couple ZFS myths. I think this is, I have if you type in like ZFS torture testing, I have a video on my channel about this where we show how portable it is and how resilient it is. But that also includes the fact that ECC memory is always better. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't use ECC. I'm saying you do not have to use ECC. And this is what people keep trying to say, is that you have to use it or you'll end up with bit rot. And it's actually not true. The level of integrity checking before a copy on write happens means that even if something in memory got flipped around, and ECC is supposed to correct for that, error correcting memory should correct the error. And it is better that way, it does do the error correction. But if you don't have ECC, if a checksum is reached when it tries to write something to the drive and the memory has some type of brokenness in there, the likelihood that the memory would only be broken for a single bit inside of something being written to the drive that would somehow then also pass a checksum, because each copy on write has a checksum to make sure and verify that every write happened, is just, you go play the lottery. You're way more likely to win a lottery than that to happen. And I've covered that by shocking and pulling memory out of a running motherboard, showing there is some challenges. Now, granted, if you're running a scrub, pulling the memory out can potentially cause problems, not because of the ECC, because you're taking and pulling memory and writing it. If you did it enough and you lost enough pieces of a journal, yes, eventually you could break it. But it's not an absolute. You can run a reliable ZFS system. Also of note, in the last 25 years I've been in tech, memory errors do not account for as many problems as they used to. Memory's just more reliable now. So
Yeah.
as much as if you can afford it and if the option is there to buy a higher quality ECC memory, not stopping you, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's not an absolute requirement. You can build a system without ECC and it still works.
Yeah, and that's about pricing too. That's one thing I often tell people if they're buying a laptop, a server, a storage unit. Um, they might say, and this is valid, but if I went with this memory, this feature, whatever, it's $200 more. Yeah, it is. Do you have to buy it right now? Could you
Yeah.
save the extra $200 in a couple of months? Can you wait it out? If you can, and you could just save up some more money on top of it and treat it more as an investment, I think that's valid. Why not? Because it's important. So I understand, yeah, I have the money right now, especially with the stimulus checks coming. We got to spend it all. I'm not saying that's what anyone's going to do, but
Yeah.
if it's literally down to a couple $100 difference, just wait a little bit longer until you save that
Yeah.
extra money and make sure you're getting all the features that you want and you're not skimping on something that you really could take advantage of.
And I'll also say the other myth related to memory that just comes up persistently is someone said for rule of thumb, you need X amount of memory for each TB of storage. That's a lot fuzzier. That's not exactly true. There becomes a point of diminishing return. So even if you have a 500 terabytes or more server, does not mean you need a roughly 500 gigabytes of RAM. That's just not what the way it exactly works. Once you have the operating system overhead, yeah, it's not, if you can afford more memory, don't worry. It's
RAM, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So the nice thing is, if you have memory, once you have the operating system covered, and I even have one of my systems I've done some review on is one of the TrueNAS Mini X's that is running with 8 gigs of RAM, but 40 terabytes. And yes, 8, not 16 gig, not 24 gig, 8. You heard that right. And it works quite well because, one, I'm not sucking up memory with a bunch of jails because there's not a lot of memory to suck up for jails. The other thing it's not doing is much caching. Now, the advantage you have with memory in ZFS, there is a certain amount of overhead it does have. But once you get over 16 and 24 gigs, if you look, and they've done a nice job in TrueNAS of presenting this better, because I've seen people in the past thinking that they had a memory leak when they look at the memory going, oh my gosh, it used up all the memory. I had 32 gig, then I bought 64 gig, and it used up all that too. ZFS is not wasteful of memory. It actually goes, well, I'm going to cache it. I don't know if you'll ask for this file again, but you asked for it once, let's cache it. And you ask for it again, I'm not doing anything else in memory, let's cache it. You get a lot of speed advantages. And actually, when it comes to caching, this is somewhere where your money can be more well spent, is in having a little extra memory in the system versus a caching drive. There's a lot of calculations that I won't get into, as I do have a whole performance ZFS that is a long talk with a lot of write-ups about how to dive into performance, because yes, you can also add a caching drive. You can also add a log intent drive. Those do help in certain ways for certain workloads, and then they got better because now they have metadata drives. I haven't done a video on that one yet, but I believe Wendell from Level 1 Text talks about ZFS metadata drives. He's got a video on that. Another deep dive. It's like a 30-minute video because there's a lot to do. But back to just the memory topic, yeah, you can actually, depending on the workload and depending on what your needs are, you don't necessarily need to have a ton of memory to get started. You can start out with a little bit. And in the case of my one at home with 8 gigs of RAM, that runs a 20 terabyte storage for my son for all of his Steam games. So his computer connects via iSCSI to a true NAS, and it also I use it for a few other things around the house just to store some data at home, backups and things like that, offsite backups. But yeah, it makes for a great 20 terabyte server, and it actually performs quite well with a 1 gig interface and 8 gigs of RAM, and it's a dual core system. Yes, dual cores, not quad, not we're talking, it's an Atom processor. If you type in Steam free NAS or Steam True NAS, you'll find my video on it. And it actually, it's kind of a proof of concept where if you want to get into True NAS, it's not the barrier for entry is enterprise hardware. You can build it on some pretty basic and still get reasonable performance out of there. And of course, because the same True NAS software that I set up on a $50,000 server for a movie studio is the same software you have access to run on here. You can still really learn the functionality. You can dive into it and get good at understanding how those storage concepts work. We lost you, Jay. Your sound went.
Oh gosh, my sound went. You know, that mute button. Gosh, nowadays. But no, I mean it's a great point, and especially like using something like this for a Steam cache. I mean that's just pretty smart. And
yeah,
you know,
the Steam cache. Well, I say cache, it's actually just a Steam library where everything is stored. But yeah, because now instead of putting a bigger hard drive in there, he's got an NVMe boot drive and then a 20 terabyte iSCSI presented as a hard drive to Windows. So because Steam games.
yeah, it may as well. I mean, we have more Steam games than we could logically ever finish in our lifetime. But you know, hey, let's collect them all.
Yeah, well, they keep getting bigger, so that's a whole.
Yeah, even with the PS5, the PlayStation 5, I was just shocked how big the average game is. I'm like, oh my gosh, I filled up the PlayStation 5's hard drive like the first or second day I had it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's what we have for storage servers. Any final thoughts we have on this, Jay?
I do want to mention Open Media Vault, which I think is kind of like the one that didn't get any attention. But the reason why is I don't know it as well as others. Again, I do have a build video coming out, and I am going to keep an Open Media Vault server on my network going forward because I'm going to show everything. If I'm going to show storing things, I'll show it on TrueNAS. I'll show it on Open Media Vault because Open Media Vault can have a lower barrier of entry than TrueNAS for some people, and it can get you started easier too. And it's a one command install. You just install Debian or what have you. And in my video, it's going to be a Raspberry Pi. So if you have a Raspberry Pi, and yeah, I mean you're going to have some slowdowns. It's not going to be the fastest thing in the world, but it might be fast enough for you. And maybe that's just good enough. So Open Media Vault is something I'll become more proficient with as I learn it. But so far, I do like it, and I've enjoyed my time with it. So that is an option that I think people might want to look into as well.
I think too, there's probably a separate episode we would do because it's like the interesting use cases for those people that are going, you guys talked about a lot of speed and a lot of fancy stuff, but Open Media Vault on Raspberry Pi, I've seen a few different people doing builds on it. And what's interesting to me is like you can now in general build a really low power. There's a couple companies selling some kit that allows you to throw a few hard drives together with a Raspberry Pi and make something that is lower wattage than probably Synology, and run something like Open Media Vault. And by the way, someone may ask, can you run TrueNAS on something like Raspberry Pi? And the answer is no, not at all. It's just not compiled to run on ARM, but Open Media Vault does have an ARM option. So it is more of a micro home lab. Is there another series called micro home labbing?
I don't know, because if we say that too many times, people say, yes, you need to do that too.
Yeah,
You need to get on that.
I'm just going to say micro home labs are a subset of this. So when we do some home lab on Raspberry Pi, we'll add the word micro home lab in there, because that's probably a good way to describe it.
That being said, I did just buy 10, I'm not kidding, 10, as in 1010 Raspberry Pi 8 gig boards. That is shipping to the studio. And it's going to be a 10 node Raspberry Pi Kubernetes cluster. And of course, I'm going to show the power usage after I build it. It's going to be in a cluster case that actually has 12 layers on it. I'm going to have one as the master node, and then probably a storage one as well, because it can slot 12 Raspberry Pis. It's ginormous. I can't wait to do this video. So as soon as this stuff comes in, I'll have my own micro home lab, I guess you could call it that. You don't have to have Kubernetes on each single node. I mean, you could have like a 5-node Kubernetes cluster and then some other Pis that do other things, and or not even Kubernetes at all, and just have individual servers on each. And they have your web server as one and your storage server as the other, any way you'd like. I really think, Raspberry Pis are going to get even bigger. I think people are going to be competing at some point with what they can get away with on Raspberry Pis with as little power as possible. And I think that's a great thing to try to do.
Yeah, I think we will do an episode on that, just throwing that out for the audience, because is like Jay says, one of the lowest cost ways to get in there. You can learn some of these functionality, some of these things right on one of these Raspberry Pis, and it's way cheaper than about any other hardware to get started. We actually, I won't digress too much into that. We also talked about that in the virtualization. At the end of the virtualization show, we have similar discussion about building stacks of systems with Raspberry Pi. So I think it's going to eventually just lead to an episode about them. So
I can see that happening. Yeah. So
all right. Well, thank you guys, everyone who showed up. There's quite a few of you here on the live stream. Looks like we had 333 people. If everyone could bash that like button if you're here, if you're listening to this when we get the audio published and we have the podcast done, that'll be at thehomelab.show. The domain has been purchased. If you're going there at this moment, I'm saying it on March 17th. There's nothing there, but yes, we're working. By the next episode, we should have our podcast out. So
we're kind of both pulled in a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And we have
me and Jay do a lot of things.
Back to the thing. It's like, oh, new shiny. No thing.
Yeah.
New shiny thing.
And somewhere between, me and Jay both have jobs where we work in the tech industry. So there's, between the content we produce, this show, and then everything else, it's a lot. And we got to find time for games,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So thanks, everyone, for joining. Oh, good. 123 likes now. Thank you, everyone. So they're just now hearing it, because I know there's a delay. So if some more of you can click that, that'd be great. We'll see you guys next Wednesday. We had to move the time this time, but we'll try to put it back to the other time earlier in the day, and we'll get the notice out sooner. There were a series of things booked earlier, so we couldn't do it at the same time we did for the other ones. But stay tuned and check out the website for more details. Thanks.
Thank you. And also subscribe to our channels.
Oh, that too, yeah. Subscribe to our channels. Easy to find. LearnLinux.tv, and you're already on this channel. LawrenceSystems.com.